First of all, please allow me to briefly introduce Dr. Peng a little bit. Dr. Peng obtained his PhD degree at the Newcastle University in the United Kingdom and is currently serving as an assistant professor in the Department for Applied Linguistics at the University of Warwick. And prior to the current appointment, he researched and lectured at the University of the Arts London, Newcastle upon Tyne, and Liverpool's China campus. He received his PhD in Media and Cultural Studies from Newcastle, where he was also awarded an MA in Media and Journalism with distinction. And Dr. Peng has published a book entitled A Feminist Reading of China's Digital Public Sphere on 2020, together with Palgrave Macmillan. He's also the co-editor of two books, China, Media and International Conflicts, and Communications in the Contemporary China, Orchestration Thinking. Yeah. So till now, Dr. Peng has published over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles and also stands on the committee, editorial committee of the journal Feminist Media Studies. I would say that as a qualitative researcher, Dr. Peng has been extremely productive. Yeah. Today, Dr. Peng's talk, the theme of the talk is applying critical discourse analysis to Chinese language social media data. So actually, unlike other sociological methodologies, critical discourse analysis has its unique merits. It is committed to enhancing the understanding of discourse in societal processes, adopting an explicitly critical standpoint. And the reason that I feel imperative to invite Dr. Peng to deliver a lecture is that I realize that many of the grad students I have taught, and me myself, personally like the method of critical discourse analysis, but we dare not really try to apply it in our research. So I think it is pretty necessary to have Dr. Peng to, systematically introduce this kind of methodological approach and, walk us through. Also introduce some of your, recent and past research. So Dr. Peng, if you're ready, you can share your screen. And I think that this entire talk will last for around 1 hour, and we can have like 5 or 10 minutes for a Q&A section. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for the extended introduction. Almost feel I'm not really entitled for those things. But yeah, really appreciate that. And thank you so much for inviting me, for having me to deliver this talk. And the talk is entitled Applying Critical Discourse Analysis to Chinese Language Social Media Data. So basically it's focusing a theoretical and methodological dimension of CDA and how it could be applied in the Chinese context and using a few case studies to discuss this. So basically the aims and objectives of today's talk to discuss what exactly is critical discourse analysis. And in particular, well, as a researcher myself and as a peer reviewer, I could see in the journal review process, I could find colleagues who claim to be using the CDA and not really applying the theory or the method in their work. So that's something we could discuss at a later stage, of course. And in particular, what we're going to focus on is how exactly we can use this particular approach to analyzing Chinese language social media data. So first, what is CDA? Because basically, CDA is a group of, very important, is a group of interdisciplinary approaches to language use. So it's not just one approach. But all these approaches, they share in common examining a language and other forms in use that advance our understanding of how discourse it functions in societal processes and social structure and social change. Basically, CDA, very important. It is not just a method. And in particular, a lot of CDA scholars will actually critique the idea that CDA being simply used as a method rather than incorporating the theoretical dimension of this approach. And also very important, it's not a singular or homogeneous approach. So it's more like a research program. and it examines a real-world example of language in use with the text as our main unit of analysis. So it has a methodological focus. This approach is slightly different comparing to some other approaches. It's both theory and method. So CDA originally emerged in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and it's explicitly political theory and method to examine and uncover how dominance occurs and neutralized through discourse. And so there are very different ways to approaching CDA. For example, key thinkers in the field, including the well-known names, Norman Fairclough, for example, who represents a dialectical relational approach, and Russell Wodock, a discourse historical approach, and Van Dyke, a social cognitive approach. So they all, these approaches, they have their very specific focus and the very specific analytical scope and analysis procedures. But what they share in common is trying to uncover, taking a critical stance to uncover dominance and inequality, how it's perpetuated in society through discourse. So what is discourse then? There are lots of different definitions, and some they actually not that compatible with each other. There are understandings, for example, Stuart Hall defines discourse as a group of statements which provides a language for talking about, a way of representing knowledge about, and a particular topic at a particular historical moment. And then Wodock defines discourse more broadly, encompassing basically anything that's communication related, and from a historical moment, a collective memory, a policy, political strategy, narratives, and so on and so forth. And in particular, they focus on how a term, the text and talk and speech and topic related conversations, and even to language use itself. And then Fairclough's definition then is more specific. Is defining discourse as a language associated with a particular social field or practice, or a way of constructing aspects of the world associated with a particular social perspective. So we could see Fairclough's approach to discourse is quite specific and slightly different comparing to Russell Wodock, even though they also work closely together with each other. So basically, define, but what these definitions they share in common is that the discourse, they are engineered in communication through different modes of semiotic items to facilitate sense-making. And these sense-making, decoding the sense-making process is what CDA researchers were trying to do. So what CDA does, CDA examines the way that processes of production impact on what can and cannot be written by Paul Baker, also a well-known applied linguist. And they focus on the role of discourse in the reproduction and challenge to dominance. So this is focusing on reproduction of power through discourse. And there are different modes of discourse power, which facilitates the perpetuation of imbalanced power relations in society. So there is a very interesting tradition in the CDA discipline. It tends to criticize the power, tend to uncover how inequalities are perpetuated, and this process and developed the interest of focusing on the top-down relations of dominance and rather than less on bottom-up relations of resistance, resilience, and acceptance, and so on and so forth. So we could see this is a unique tradition within the broad disciplinary area. And what CDA researchers or CDA as an approach, research approach, it's built on the premise that power is very important. It's also created through discourse. So these aspects of domination is different from the kind of entrenched institutional power, which exercise power through other more institutional form of violence, using police force, using punishment, and so on and so forth. It's more focusing on how communication, this process, it facilitates the exercise of power. And actually, we could see a lot of examples of how these power relations are created in our everyday life. Sometimes this exercise of power is less problematic than some others in certain contexts. For example, in higher education, professors, in a lot of ways, they also controls the scholarly discourse, and teachers, and the educational discourse, and journalists, media discourse, lawyers, legal discourse, politicians, policies, and public political discourse. It's based on their expertise, their knowledge, that allows them to exercise power. So here, in a way, I'm also exercising my power, claiming that I'm an expert in CDA, right? And then explaining what the method is about. But of course, this involves power relations. And in this process, that also opens up to debate, for example. Some of the ideas you are also entitled to disagree with me as well, as long as the argument is well justified, of course. So power is discursive. That's what CDA as a disciplinary area we focus on. And then CDA, quite different than some other theoretical approaches, is that it also prescribes quite specific methodological approach to data. So as we said, CDA has a strong focus on language use, and in particular, it's often based on analysis of textual data. And Fairclough probably most well known for prescribing this three-layer model, a three-dimensional model, which unpacks the analytical procedure into three different steps, including textual analysis. So basically how texts, they are organized, they are composed, they are generated to express social power. And then discursive practice, then is how particular texts are produced and consumed by audience. And in particular, in this process, how, if we refer to Judith Butler's term, stylized repetition of acts is established in the process, in the text. And then, very important, and that makes discourse CDA different from conventional discourse analysis in linguistics. Then it also have a strong focus on social practice. That is how the social cultural meaning of those texts, how it emerge from and feed into broader societal processes. So that's what Fairclough's model advise CDA scholars to do in the specific analysis. But of course, there are a lot of different approaches. There's not just one single approach to data analysis. For example, Russell-Wardock tend to divide analysis into two parts, a discursive analysis and focusing on different discursive strategies. And she prescribes a list of different typical discursive strategies that will be useful for one to make sense of how communication or how argument is put forward in the text. And then move on to the social cultural contextualization of those discursive strategies. So that's Russell-Wardock's approach. And textual analysis, and then at textual level, analysis, also there are different ways to analyze the text, and in particular, what researchers often focus on, including the lexical analysis. So basically, the choice and the meanings of words used in media text. So that's very specific aspects of the CDA in data analysis, as we can see. And that's also, on a side note, that's why when I review some of the journal articles, I also noted that authors, probably they are not really conducting a specific textual analysis, the lexical level of analysis, and move straight to social cultural explanation of the significance of the text. And this is usually not considered within the tradition of CDA, I would say. And how to conduct those textual analysis, I'm also using a few examples from previous scholars. For example, John Richardson's analysis of British journalism. So how discourse is used to legitimize Britain's role in war and conflict. So for example, John Richardson conducted an extended analysis of news reports in the UK that covers the UK's and the US coalition, their invasion of Iraq in 2003. And they discovered, he and his colleagues discovered that a specific choice of word being used in the news coverage, we could see a clear way of constructing the them and us dichotomy. And so for the Iraq side, for Saddam Hussein, they have a war machine, they have censorship, they have propaganda. But in a democracy in the UK, we don't have that. We have army, we have navy, we have air force, and we have reporting restrictions, we have press briefings, not censorship, not propaganda at all. And they have, they destroy, when they kill people, they destroy, they kill. And we suppress, we eliminate, we neutralize. And they launch sneaky attacks, we launch our first strikes. And there means there are troops, holds, and we have boys, lads, and Saddam is demented, and George Bush is resolute. So we could see the word choice basically describing very similar actions, but they use very different nouns and verbs, and to communicate the meaning, to construct them us dichotomy in order to legitimize the UK's invasion of Iraq. And we could see in popular news discourse, we could also see different kind of labeling or what we call naming or referencing or nomination. For example, we could see when it comes to coverage of stories about ethnic minorities, labeling those people as Muslims, or in gender terms, labeling them as women. So what they do, and the Chinese equivalent, probably that's also what we widely observe in our news coverage, female drivers, those terms being used by the media to simplify the event, to create a group membership for those involved, individuals involved in the news story, to communicate certain meanings, and in particular, that often facilitate reinforcing the racial or gender stereotypes. So labeling they apply to shape how stories is interpreted, as we can see. And there are also other specific techniques being used in communication, in composing text. For example, metaphoric association. So basically, how metaphors are used to create, associate certain objects with certain values. For example, when talking about the refugee crisis after the Syrian civil war, then a lot of refugees, what they do is they flooded the UK, flooded Europe like a flood. So basically, this metaphor, it creates a kind of public anxiety of refugees crossing the border, entering their country. So we could see all these techniques being used in media discourse. And for CDA researchers, a strong focus is to analyze how these facilitate reinforcing stereotypes to entrench the imbalanced power relation in society. And in today's talk, of course, I'm also going to give some examples that's specific to my own research. And as Yan mentioned, a lot of my research actually focused on gender power relations in the Chinese language social media. And the first case study I'm sharing is the spokeswomen under the male gaze. It's a recent piece which focuses on how women, they are stereotypically portrayed, but not in elite discourse, but in a grassroots sports fans social mediated communication. So the research basically explores one single key question and focus on how are female athletes sexualized in the Chinese language social media communication. And then the field side I choose, the data collection was conducted on the most used Chinese language sports fandom, Hupu, which was launched in 2004. In the beginning was just for basketball fans, but gradually, as it developed its reputation in the field, and then has been adopted by sports fans across the board. And statistics shows that Hupu has approximately 55 million active users, and that was in 2020. I only imagine they will have more today. And over 90% of Hupu users are men, and this provides a fertility field site for data collection to uncover how male sports fans in China, they portray female athletes. And the case study, and it focused on two examples. The first one focusing on how Olympic medalist, Chinese Olympic medalist Zhang Yufei was portrayed by male Hupu fans. And then the second is about Marta, the Brazilian famous athlete, football player. And we could see a total of 451 posts was collected from the key question being asked on this platform that prompt extended discussion about Zhang Yufei, and the second, including a number of posts which retrieved from the platform and prompt a total of 281 posts from male Hupu users. And we could see in terms of the example of Zhang Yufei, we could see that the nominations being used as a technique or naming or referencing. As we can see, the medalist is not often referred to by her name, but instead using a lot of gender designations, reference to her, that including the naive white sweetie as the most typical one. So often described as Hupu fans often describe her as so-called 傻白甜 or naive white sweetie, which is a which is a trending of buzzwords in the Chinese context, which portrays or is an established stereotype of particular type of women, often vulnerable, innocent, and beautiful, have sexual attraction, but also inexperienced in sex, that makes her both compatible with males' appreciation of women's sexual attraction, but also desexualize their sexual attraction in a way that allows the stereotype to be in accordance with the conventional traditional Chinese value. But of course, the nomination itself it offers clues of this gender stereotyping of the female athletes. But what's more intriguing to analyze is that a lot of discussions is not just based on referencing based on the nomination, but more subtle discursive strategy, including predication. For example, they predicate on their particular, based on their understanding of her certain characteristics, and then predicates the values that she embodies. For example, a lot of instances we could see that's quite insulting. And here we offer a few examples here. As seen in these extracts, so the male Hupu users, they predicated Zhang's lack of sexual value by qualifying her athletic accomplishments as a negative quality in romantic relationships. So considering her as far too strong, and then couldn't find a male match for her. So we could see even very blatantly highlighting that her height, shoulder-wise, wings span, all these literally ordinary men could not handle, so render her sexually unattractive. And very interesting discourse we could locate in the process also includes superficial, what I call superficial self-reflection. As we could see, as sports fans, important aspects of sports fandom is refers to fans, their self-reflection, they're invoking their self-reflexive capacity to understand, to negotiate their own position in society. And we could see these kind of reflections taking place in the communication, and a lot of the self-reflections involves using puns or other kind of memes or other forms of communication, using humor to communicate their understanding or their insecurity about their power relation in society that is being undermined in era when social stratification is intensified. As we can see, often referred to Zhang Yufei, for example, referring to her accomplishment and then considering themselves as not a perfect match for her because she is her accomplishment is far greater than ordinary men. So this kind of understanding, it shows, it underscores the irony of juxtaposing an elite sportswomen and the ordinary men, and invite fellow Hupu users to mock their own unrealistic sexual desire for the athlete. But then this self-reflection only takes place at a very superficial level. It doesn't challenge the imbalanced power relation in society, not only in gendered forms, but also in otherwise related in terms of the social economic stratification, for example. But we're not going to go into much details about it, of course, here. And the second case study about Marta, the famous footballer in Brazil, and we could see a lot of the discourse analysis we could see also starts with the referential strategy or nomination strategy, but here it's quite unique. They often refer to Marta not by her name, but by referring to her as a female version of those famous male footballers, Pele, okay, Ronaldinho, or female Maradona. So all kinds of nomination strategies, as we could see, that highlights accomplishment, but in a lot of ways that involved trivializing sportswomen's accomplishment. The merits of Marta is not by her own accomplishment, but her achievement that makes her equivalent of other men in men's sports genre. Of course, this discussion, this referential or nomination strategy has its use in social media communication because those are household names in among sports fans, so makes a discussion more relevant to other sports fans who probably not familiar with Marta, but still that reflects a kind of gendered stereotypes of women's sports as not as important, not as interesting as male category, and this becomes more blatant or more apparent when we see those discussions that explicitly compares female and male athletes or men and women's sports. And we could see in general, and we could see discussions that often start with them comparing those male sports fans, comparing female footballers with and their capacity, whether they are capable of playing in men's football leagues, for example. And we could see a lot of discussions that point towards a trajectory that trivialize sports women's accomplishment, considering women's sports as well interesting, but they are not capable of competing in the men's category. What's more important is a discourse not just comparing women and men's sports categories. More importantly, they involves the vulgar interpretation of evolution, explaining or justifying the superiority of men, not just in sports, but also in wider society. So very interesting or shocking post, as we can see from here. So it compares the women and men, female male differences of mammals as a metaphor to explain or to understand the human society. Explaining that that's why men are still dominating and should dominate social economic resources, and justifying, validating the hierarchical order of women and men in human society. But of course, that overlooks the complexity of the those mammals in biological terms. As we can see, there are also different species. There are female categories that are more stronger than male category, and in particular, stereotypes of male lions, for example, being lazy and doing nothing all day. And I imagine no man want to associate with these stereotypes. But of course, in the discourse, we could see they completely overlooked those differences to justify their version of how the society should function. Okay, so that's the first case study. And the second case study then focused on stereotyping of female leaders on Chinese social media platforms. So this research then is based on analysis of the Zhihu users' discussions, the Chinese netizens' discussions about Jacinda Ardern's electoral success on social media platforms, and in particular, analyze how gender discourses that invoked by those netizens to rationalize Ardern's political achievements. Well, a bit of background information, of course. Jacinda Ardern was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was elected in 2016-17. And that success provoked a prompt, extended discussion on Zhihu, and focusing on Zhihu data, then conduct analysis to understand how different users, they portray or understand the event through engaging in the discussion. And based on the data collection, I collect a total of 134 posts from the platform, which represents the entire collection of the most extended discussions about these politicians' electoral success back then. So we could see again a very important characteristics of the textual data is that it often invokes referential strategy, name Jacinda Ardern. Okay, often refer her by using that kind of gender designation. Okay, for example, refer to her as Sister Ardern, or the beautiful female politician, so a pretty female prime minister, and so on and so forth. So those discourse, and it's actually shared across women and men on the platform, as we can see. So those discourse, it shows those referential strategy. It shows the kind of stereotypical portrayal of female politicians, underscore often highlighting their gender identity or gender characteristics to understand their personal image. And this kind of referential strategy, it occurs, occasionally applied to male politicians as well, but it's much less frequent, as we can see. Often male politicians are taken for granted. Politicians, word by nature is gender neutral, but it's often allude to masculine characteristics. And when we focus on unpack the discourse a bit further, we could see all kinds of predication strategies being used to understand the politician's electoral success. And we could see for women in the discussion, it tend to, in a lot of ways, defend, taking a defensive mode to defend the success of Ardern as success as a representation of women's capacity and work ability, and in particular in the political context, in the public sphere. And then men within the post, within the thread, we could see most posts generated by men, they often describes the electoral success as a conspiracy concluded by the deputy prime minister, okay, who was then a deputy of Jacinda Ardern, because a bit of context, Jacinda Ardern, the first electoral success, it was based on it was based on coalition government between her own party and another small party in the parliament, New Zealand Parliament. And instead, in the collision, as it was clearly she was the one in the position of strength, but then a lot of men, they considered her as the one, as a puppet being manipulated by the deputy prime minister, who is a man. And as we could see, actually, this predication of conspiracy was clearly rejected during the pandemic. The second electoral success of Jacinda Ardern that gave her an outright majority in the parliament. Of course, her popularity rate suffered then at a later stage of the pandemic due to all kinds of domestic issues, and led to her resignation. But clearly, she was one of the few politicians in New Zealand history that has an outright majority, able to form a majority government without coalition. So those conspiracy, of course, is completely rejected. But men in the discourse, they tend to legitimize or rationalize her success as a kind of undermined or marginalize her own subjectivity and strengths in political processes, reflecting their stereotypical understanding of politics as entrenched masculine terror. And these, as we can see, then it links to a lot of this predication strategy being deployed by male Zhihu users, often associated with the argumentation strategy, which allows them to rationalize the unsuitability of women in politics and beyond, and in particular, highlights a politician. Jacinda Ardern was also famous for being pregnant and deliver a baby during her first term in office. And we could see these as being involved as argumentation strategy to justify that women are not suitable for politics. And in particular, they often make a comparison between small countries and big countries. And considering, for example, China, America, Russia, why don't have female politicians, female leaders at the national level, is because women are unsuitable for politics. But of course, that overlooks the fact that men, they also might require a deputy to step in when, for example, they got sick, like in the UK, the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson was hospitalized during the early stage of the pandemic, being infected with COVID, and that happened to America as well, Donald Trump as well. So we could see those situations that applies to men, but clearly those Zhihu users completely overlook, marginalize, or intentionally ignore those facts to justify the unsuitability of women in politics. Okay, so that's important. Well, and also and also a lot of the discourse also refers to offering argumentation strategy, offering arguments beyond the context of politics to justify the general unsuitability of women in the workplace, considering women getting pregnant as important weakness of them in as part of the workforce, as we could see in the discourse. But of course, there are detailed social cultural analysis, probably here not very suitable for analyzing in detail. So a few concluding remarks. So gender stereotypes often plays out in sports fandom context as male Hupu fans sexualizing elite sports women and trivializing their sporting accomplishment. And it also plays out as how female and male Zhihu users, they respectively rationalize their support or criticism of the high-profile female politicians. And these cases offer us a glimpse of how to apply critical discourse analysis to Chinese language social media data. Okay, and how to cite those the presentation. Here's a reference and also other recommended readings for today's talk. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. And any question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Peng, for many of your interesting points and your recent studies. If there are any questions, I see an audience, just turn on the camera. If you have any questions, just feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Can I have one quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Peng. That was really a great session, very insightful. The 2 case studies are really interesting. I'm a bit on the technical side of CDA, so which is relevant to what I'm doing right now. I'm trying to analyze like Chinese podcasts by using CDA, but the data is just a lot. Like one episode can have over 10,000 words. So I'm just wondering, like, how are you going to analyze that such like a big amount of data by using CDA, and what is the difference between CDA and thematic analysis, for example? Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for your question. And I imagine that's a dilemma, a tricky issue for a lot of qualitative researchers, how you deal with volumes of data that potentially have value for analysis. And there are different approaches to this question, I would say. I mean, myself, as a researcher, I tend to take a more pragmatic approach and using a mixed method to conduct data analysis. At the first stage, I often apply a content analysis. First, to sort out the key features of volumes of data to locate key themes, as we could see, and using a developed coding scheme to quantify the data, to understand, to give you a overall impression of the data, and then locate those important or significant aspects of the data that for more detailed qualitative analysis. And there are also other approaches like a lot of applied linguists. They also use corpus linguistics and mixing that, triangulating that with CDA. But of course, for qualitative researchers, I also see colleagues who conduct analysis, which still dealing with volumes of data, but go straight to the qualitative analysis, locating those important, those aspects of data that that's important to facilitate, substantiate the argument. And actually in CDA, as we could see, is explicitly political, acknowledge researchers' subjectivity. So in a lot of ways, it's different from some methods, like quantitative researchers often tend to subscribe to positivist views to knowledge. And these differences in qualitative analysis, then there's no need to claim that you are objective observer. You are entitled to focus on the aspects of data you wish to focus on, as long as in the analysis you make this transparent. Okay, as Rousseau-Wodak says, you make your decision transparent. You're not trying to be objective. You are explicitly political, criticizing the power, but you are making your selection of data at a different stage totally transparent to your readers. And these still justify the issue, how you choose a particular aspect, type of data, aspects of data to conduct analysis. Okay. And in terms of the differences between thematic analysis and critical discourse analysis, of course, it's in terms of the theoretical dimension, as I said. CDA is also theoretical. is a political perspective, trying to scaffold progressive politics and criticizing the entrenched power in current social economic structure. Okay, and semantic analysis then it more focus on the data itself, what themes emerge from the data, and the analytical procedure is also quite different, of course. So they are the main differences. But I imagine here I can offer extended talk on semantic analysis itself. So, but I appreciate your question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question and the answer. I see there are 3 questions on the chat. I would like to read the questions on behalf of the person who just asked the question. Okay, Yiran Zhang, thank you, Dr. Pan, for your presentation. I want to know whether I can use CDA to analyze the discourse between doctoral students and their supervisors to explore the power of supervision discourse. Yeah, would you like to answer that question? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank Yiran Zhang for raising this question. And I will say, yes, that's actually a part of what CDA could do, actually. So analyzing, as I mentioned, the relationship between supervisors and a PhD student that also involves power dynamics. You usually consider the supervisors in the position of strength, isn't it? And the imbalanced power relation indeed could potentially opens up debates, opens up opportunity to analyze from a critical perspective. But I imagine if you are a CDA researcher, then you tend to focus on the problematic aspects of the interaction. So for example, whether the supervisors are involved in some kind of sexual harassment against the female supervisees. So these kind of topics will be suitable. But if you are analyzing in general how power is constructed in the process, I imagine more discourse analysis within linguistic domain that will be suitable if you are not explicitly criticizing the wider institutional structure within society. So I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting topic. And the second question comes from Eve. Recently, I happened to read Dr. Pan's paper about sports women, rather inspiring for my research. Many things. The first question about feminist critical discourse analysis, since CDA doesn't have a specific analytical framework as DHA or 3-dimensional approach, etc. So how should I understand it and how to apply it into the analysis? And the second question is, how can contextualization be well realized in CDA?
Oh, yeah. Thanks very much for the question, and thanks for supporting me, supporting my writing. Yes, FCDA, or Feminist Critical Discourse Analysis, is developed by Michelle Lanzon as a theoretical approach to CDA. Is basically adding a feminist scope, a feminist lens to conduct analysis. So focusing on gender power relations in society, how it plays out in the discursive realm. And in particular, also didn't really prescribe a particular analytical framework. And she explicitly she made explicit in her writing that FCDA application of FCDA is open to application of other methodological approaches being developed, well-established methodological approaches in CDA broader CDS field. So basically, if you wish, you could use, for example, Fairclough's 3-dimensional approach or Russell-Waldorf's specific approach to conduct analysis. That shouldn't be a problem. And that's actually what I did in my piece as well, mainly drawn on both dialectical relational approach to understand FCDA as a theoretical approach, then I also incorporate techniques from DHA, focusing on different discursive strategies being used in actual data set. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. And the second question, how contextualization can be realized in CDA. So basically CDA, what makes CDA unique or different comparing to DA in linguistics is that it emphasizes the contextualization, emphasizes the social cultural meanings and of the discourse, and in particular, how that facilitates the perpetuation of power relations in society. So applying CDA, different scholars, when they conduct analysis, they will, of course, pick up on different issues, and their rationalization or their contextualization will be very different based on their own entry, for example, the approach they take to conduct the research. So this is what's emphasized. So CDA, without contextualization, without contextualized discussion of the social cultural context, CDA researchers wouldn't be able to analyze the text. It's unlike a lot of methods in linguistics or applied linguistics, they straight to analysis of language itself. So CDA is actually more a transdisciplinary research, which require you to borrow ideas from other disciplinary areas. And these will help you to conduct contextualization. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. And we have two remaining questions. Yeah, for the time's sake, I think that you can just wrap up quickly. The third question comes from Zhao Zifan. Dr. Pan, thanks for your insightful talk. My question is about the selection of data. Since there are so many potential data, how do we select the most typical or topic-related discourses?
How to, well, that's a very interesting question. And in terms of the data collection, of course, that requires you to incorporate techniques from other disciplinary areas. As I mentioned, in my research, I often, if the data set is quite large, then I would tend to start with content analysis to first offer a first impression, overall overview of the entire data set, and then focusing on specific examples that showcase the typical instances that that is illustrative of the big picture. But of course, as I mentioned, CDA as a research method is different comparing to some other quantitative research methods that doesn't require the researcher to assume objective observer's role in the process, in the research process, in the research design. They're explicitly political. They're explicitly acknowledging their subjectivity. So these gives the researchers the leeway to decide what types of data they wish to include, as long as they are able to offer. First, they need to make that transparent and need to offer sufficient justification of the reasoning behind that decision. Okay, so the thinking is quite different comparing to quantitative research methods. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And the last question came from Ze Sheng. Well, Dr. Pan, I read your several papers related to sportscom. Is sportscom your main research line in recent years? Is there any other conferences or seminars on which you will give presentation in person in this year? That's also the question I would like to ask. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, I'm currently in ICA, and actually in, well, 15 minutes, I'm going to present my first paper in the conference. And last day, I also have another session I'm a chair. And this year I'm also attending a conference in Korea for Asia Studies Association, and also I have a forthcoming guest talk at University of York and also University of Westminster in next month. So stay tuned. But thank you so much for your support.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
I really hope that you can have more chances to like travel to mainland China and deliver more talks for us. Yeah. Thank you so much for your insightful and thoughtful and inspirational lecture, which is very, contains a lot of information and helpful the research that, helps us understand the CDA as a methodology. Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope to meet you in person sometime in the international conference. Yeah.
Yeah, me
thank
too.
you so
looking
much.
forward. Thanks for having me.
Sure,
Bye.
sure. And have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.